What is this?" Isabel's scream pierced the quiet nursery like a shard of glass. Amara jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. Clara startled in her arms and began to wail. Julian stood frozen in the doorway as his wife, dressed in a stunning Milan designer gown, pointed at the scene with a trembling finger. "You let the maid sleep with our daughter? On the floor? Like some kind of animal?" Isabel's voice was a toxic blend of disgust and rage. "Julian, I want her fired. Now! Tonight!" Julian's expensive Italian leather shoes made no sound on the polished oak floor as he walked toward his baby daughter's room at 3 a.m. He had just returned from a long business trip to Singapore, and the house felt cavernous and cold, as it always did. But something was different tonight. As he pushed open the nursery door, expecting to find baby Clara sleeping alone in her ivory crib, his heart nearly stopped. There, curled up on the hard wooden floor beside the crib, was Amara, his black maid. She was fast asleep, her simple uniform wrinkled, using only her folded apron as a pillow. One of her hands reached through the crib bars, gently cradling his 6-month-old daughter's tiny hand. Clara was sleeping peacefully, her other hand clutching Amara's finger like it was her most precious possession. Julian stood frozen in the doorway, his mind reeling with questions that threatened to unravel everything. Why was his maid sleeping on the floor? Where was the expensive specialist he had hired? And why did his daughter seem so utterly content with this woman he barely ever acknowledged? But before he could take a step to wake them, he heard the sharp click of heels coming down the hallway. Someone was coming, and Julian had a sinking feeling that what he was about to discover would shatter his perfect, controlled world completely. 3 months earlier. "You're fired!" Julian's voice echoed through the grand foyer of his Crestwood Hills mansion. The crystal chandelier above seemed to vibrate with his anger. Amara Jones stood quietly by the sweeping staircase, her cleaning caddy in hand, watching as another nanny stormed out of the house, muttering curses under her breath. That was the 4th nanny in 2 months. Baby Clara's cries could be heard from upstairs, sharp and full of despair. "Mr. Vance," Amara said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I could help with the baby. Just until you find someone new." Julian turned to look at her as if she had just grown a second head. In the 3 years Amara had worked in his house, he had rarely spoken more than a handful of words to her. To him, she was an invisible part of the background, someone who polished his floors and ironed his expensive shirts. "You," he said, his voice clipped and cold. "You're a maid. You clean. You don't raise children." Amara's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she kept her voice steady. "I raised my little brother after our parents died. I know about babies, sir." Julian stared at her for a long moment. Clara's cries were escalating upstairs, and he had a critical board meeting in the morning. His wife, Isabel, had left when Clara was just 1 month old, declaring that motherhood wasn't part of her personal brand. She had moved to Milan to reconnect with the fashion world, leaving him with an infant he had no idea how to soothe. "Fine," he said finally, the word tasting like defeat. "But just until I find a real nanny, and don't get any ideas, you're still just the maid." What Julian didn't know was that those cruel words would come back to haunt him. Because Amara was about to become the only person who could reach his daughter's heart, and perhaps his own. That first night, Amara climbed the grand staircase to Clara's nursery with a nervous heart. The room was a designer's dream, all soft creams and gold accents, but the baby sobbing in the magnificent crib looked so fragile and lost. "Hey there, little angel," Amara whispered, gently lifting Clara from the mattress. "It's okay. I'm here now." Clara's cries softened almost immediately. her tiny body molded against Amara's chest as if she had been waiting for this exact warmth, this exact gentle touch. Amara had grown up in a cramped apartment with her parents and baby brother. When they were killed in a highway pileup, 16-year-old Amara had to learn on the fly how to care for a devastated infant while juggling school and part-time jobs. She knew babies needed more than just formula and fresh diapers. They needed to feel safe, loved, and seen. For the next 3 hours, Amara rocked Clara, sang her soft spirituals, and told her stories about the moon outside the window. When Clara finally drifted off, Amara gently placed her back in the crib. But the moment she turned to leave, Clara began to wail again. Amara tried everything: a warm bottle, a diaper change, a check for fever. Nothing worked. Clara only stopped crying when Amara held her. It was as if the baby could sense the sincerity of her care, and when that presence retreated, the terror returned. Finally, at 2 a.m., exhausted but determined, Amara made a decision that would alter the course of their lives. She took a spare blanket from the linen closet and made a small bed for herself on the floor next to Clara's crib. She reached her hand through the bars and let the baby's fingers curl around hers. "I'm not leaving you, sweet girl," she whispered. "I'm right here." Clara fell asleep instantly, her tiny hand holding tight to Amara's. This became their secret ritual. Every night, after Julian retreated to his home office to manage his billion-dollar empire, Amara would quietly slip into Clara's room. She would sleep on the hard floor, always maintaining that physical connection through the crib bars. During the day, she continued her duties as a maid, but every spare moment was dedicated to Clara. She would strap the baby into a carrier while she worked, narrating her day. "Now we're dusting the grand piano, Clarabelle. Can you hear this pretty note?" Amara would say, gently pressing a key. "One day, maybe you'll play beautiful music." Clara began to blossom. She smiled, she giggled, and she would reach her little arms out the moment she saw Amara enter a room. For the first time since Isabel left, Clara was a happy baby. But Julian was oblivious. He was consumed by Vance Enterprises. He came home late, ate dinner prepared by the cook alone in the cavernous dining room, and went to bed, rarely even glancing into the nursery. The house staff, Mrs. Rodriguez, the cook, the gardener, the driver, all saw the change in Clara. But they also saw the toll it was taking on Amara. She was getting thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. She was working double duty day and night. "You need to take care of yourself, mija," Mrs. Rodriguez told her one morning. "That baby needs you strong." But Amara just offered a tired smile. "She's been through so much. I can't let her feel alone." What Amara didn't know was that someone else had started paying attention. Julian's business partner, David, had come to the mansion for a meeting and was captivated by how Clara lit up for Amara. "Your nanny is a miracle worker," David told Julian. "I've never seen a baby so bonded with someone." "She's not the nanny," Julian corrected him coldly. "She's the maid, helping out temporarily." David raised an eyebrow but said no more, filing the information away. 3 months into their routine, Clara got sick. It started as a low-grade fever, but by evening she was crying inconsolably and refusing to eat. Amara was frantic. She had tried calling Julian's office, but his executive assistant said he was in back-to-back meetings and could not be disturbed. Amara didn't have the money for a private doctor, nor the authority to take Clara to a hospital without Julian's consent. So she did what she knew best. She stayed by Clara's side, administering baby fever reducer, applying cool cloths to her forehead, and holding her through the long, frightening night. But this time, the floor wasn't enough. Clara was too sick, too restless. So Amara did something she knew could get her fired on the spot. She carefully lifted Clara from the crib and lay down on the floor, letting the feverish baby curl up on her chest. It was the only way Clara would settle, and Amara knew sleep was the medicine the baby needed most. That's precisely how Julian found them at 3 a.m. upon his return. But as he stood in the doorway, taking in the scene of his maid and daughter on the cold floor, the footsteps he heard approaching belonged to the one person who could turn this complicated situation into an utter catastrophe. The footsteps belonged to Isabel, his wife, Clara's mother, who had just returned from Milan unannounced. And when she saw what Julian was looking at, her shriek of fury would detonate the quiet of the house and ignite a confrontation that would expose secrets, lies, and a love no one had seen coming. The sound of Isabel's designer heels clicking faster on the oak floor grew louder, and Julian knew that in the next few seconds, his entire, meticulously constructed world was about to explode. "What is this?" Isabel's scream pierced the quiet nursery like a shard of glass. Amara jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. Clara startled in her arms and began to wail. Julian stood frozen in the doorway as his wife, dressed in a stunning Milan designer gown, pointed at the scene with a trembling finger. "You let the maid sleep with our daughter? On the floor? Like some kind of animal?" Isabel's voice was a toxic blend of disgust and rage. Amara quickly sat up, gently bouncing Clara to soothe her. "Ma'am, the baby was sick, and don't you dare speak to me!" Isabel snapped. "Julian, I want her fired, now, tonight!" But something remarkable happened. As Isabel's voice grew louder and more venomous, Clara's cries intensified. The baby squirmed, turning her face away from her mother and reaching her tiny, desperate arms toward Amara, seeking refuge with the only constant source of love in her life. Julian watched his daughter's reaction, and a profound, unsettling clarity began to dawn on him. Clara didn't know Isabel. To his daughter, this screaming woman was a terrifying stranger. "She's been taking care of Clara while you were gone," Julian said quietly, his voice measured and thoughtful for the first time in months. "Taking care of her? She's a maid, Julian. She scrubs toilets, and you let her—" Isabel couldn't finish, so overcome with revulsion. Amara stood up slowly, holding Clara close. The baby had stopped crying and was now staring at Isabel with wide, curious eyes, the eyes of a stranger, not a daughter. "I was just trying to help," Amara said softly. "Clara needed someone, and Clara needs a proper caregiver, not some—" Isabel paused, her next words hanging in the air like a poised snake. "Some what?" Julian's voice was suddenly as cold as ice. For the first time, he was truly seeing his wife, and he was repulsed by the image. Isabel's face twisted in a sneer. "You know what I mean, Julian. People like her don't belong around children like ours." The room fell deathly silent, broken only by Clara's soft, rhythmic breathing. Amara felt her face flush with shame, but she lifted her chin, her gaze locking with Isabel's. "People like me?" Amara repeated, her voice quiet but unwavering. "You mean people who stay up all night with a scared baby? People who hold them when they're sick? People who sing to them and love them, even when their own mother walks away?" Isabel's jaw dropped. No one had ever spoken to her with such audacity, least of all the hired help. But Julian was staring at Amara as if seeing her for the very first time. And what he saw wasn't just a maid. He saw a woman who had sacrificed her own comfort, her sleep, her own well-being, to care for his daughter when no one else would. Not even him. "Get out," Julian said quietly. Amara's heart plummeted. She gently kissed Clara's forehead and began to hand her to Julian. "Not you," Julian said, his eyes fixed on Amara. Then he turned his gaze, hard as steel, to his wife. "Isabel, get out. What did you just say to me?" Isabel's voice was a deadly whisper. "You heard me. Leave, now." "Julian, you can't be serious. You're choosing the maid over your own wife?" "I'm choosing the person who loves my daughter over the person who abandoned her," Julian retorted, his voice gaining strength. "Clara doesn't even know you, Isabel. Look at her." They all looked at Clara, who was now smiling and batting playfully at a loose thread on Amara's uniform, completely at ease. "I am her mother," Isabel shrieked. "No," Julian said, and the conviction in his voice shocked everyone, including himself. "A mother doesn't abandon her 1-month-old baby to find herself in Milan. A mother doesn't return 3 months later and scream at the person who's been keeping that baby safe. A mother doesn't look at her own child with disgust because she's being held by someone with loving arms." Tears began to stream down Amara's face. No one had ever stood up for her like this. Isabel's face went white with fury. "Fine. If that's how you feel, you can have your precious maid and your baby, but don't think for a second I'm going to make this easy for you." She spun on her heel and stormed toward the door, then paused, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "Oh, and Julian, you might want to ask your perfect little caregiver about the cash that's been disappearing from your study safe. Or didn't you notice that some of your designer watches are missing?" Julian's blood ran cold. He looked at Amara, whose face had gone deathly pale. "That's not true," Amara whispered, shaking her head. "I would never." But Isabel's smile widened. "Check your safe, darling husband. Then decide who you really trust." She clicked out of the room, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Julian stood motionless for a long moment. Clara had fallen back asleep in Amara's arms, peaceful despite the turmoil. "Put her in the crib," Julian said softly. Amara's hands trembled as she gently laid Clara down. The baby didn't stir, accustomed to Amara's tender touch. "Follow me," Julian commanded. They walked downstairs to his wood-paneled study, where a safe was concealed behind a landscape painting. Amara's heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst. Julian opened the safe and peered inside. Then he looked at Amara, his expression unreadable. $2,000 is missing," he said, "and my Patek Philippe watch." Amara felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Mr. Vance, I swear on my life, I never took anything from you. I've never even been in this room without you here." "Then how do you explain it?" Amara's mind raced. Who else had access? Who else knew the combination? "What about Mrs. Vance?" she asked quietly. "She lived here. She would know where you keep things." Julian's face hardened. "Are you accusing my wife of being a thief?" "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just saying she's the only other person who could have known." Julian stared at Amara for what felt like an eternity. Here was the woman who had cared for his child with selfless devotion, sleeping on a hard floor night after night, never asking for a thing. And there was his wife, who had deserted their baby and returned only to sow chaos. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. A few days before Isabel left for Milan, she had complained about her allowance. When he transferred her $10,000, she had scoffed, saying it was barely enough to cover her shopping for a week. "Wait here," Julian said. He left Amara standing in the study and went to make a phone call. 20 minutes later, he returned, a grim look on his face. "I just spoke with my bank," he said. "Isabel emptied our joint savings account the day before she left, $100,000. She also sold several of my watches to a consignment shop in Beverly Hills. They have the receipts." Amara closed her eyes, a shuddering breath escaping her lips. "But why would she accuse me?" Julian sank heavily into his leather armchair. For the first time since Amara had known him, he looked not cold and powerful, but weary and defeated. Because she sees I'm starting to wake up. She knows I'm beginning to realize what I've been blind to for months. What do you mean? Julian looked up at Amara. Really looked at her. He saw the fatigue in her eyes, the gentle strength in her hands, the slight frame that had worked so tirelessly. And he saw something else that struck him with a pang of guilt and a feeling that might just be love. I mean, he said, his voice thick with emotion, that the best mother my daughter has ever known is standing right in front of me, and I've been treating her like she was invisible. From that night on, everything changed. Julian officially terminated his contract with the nanny agency and asked Amara to become Clara's full-time caregiver. But he did more than give her a new title. He gave her a beautiful suite of rooms next to the nursery, complete with her own bathroom and sitting area. No more sleeping on the floor, he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. The biggest change, however, was in Julian himself. He started leaving the office at a reasonable hour. He would find Amara and Clara in the garden, where Amara was teaching the baby about the scents and textures of the flowers. She loves the jasmine, Amara would say, holding Clara close to the vine. Look how she smiles when she breathes it in. Julian began to see his daughter through Amara's eyes, not as a burden, but as a vibrant little person with a mind and soul of her own. He started joining them for dinner. Instead of his solitary meals, he sat with them in the bright, cheerful kitchen, learning how to feed his daughter and make her laugh. She likes it when you wiggle your eyebrows, Amara taught him. See, she thinks you're hilarious. And Clara did laugh, a pure, joyful sound that began to fill the vast, empty spaces in Julian's heart. As the weeks turned into months, Julian found himself rushing home from work, eager to see them. The mansion no longer felt like a cold museum. It felt like a warm, living home, filled with Clara's giggles and the sound of Amara's voice singing lullabies. One evening, Julian came home to find Amara crying softly in the kitchen as Clara played on a blanket nearby. "What's wrong?" he asked, a fierce protectiveness rising in his chest. "It's nothing, Mr. Vance, it's just, today would have been my mother's birthday." Julian sat down across from her. "Tell me about her." For the first time, Amara shared her story, losing her parents, raising her younger brother, working multiple jobs to keep them afloat. "After my brother graduated and got a good job, I was on my own," she said quietly. "When I started working here, caring for Clara, it felt like I had a purpose again, like I belonged somewhere." Julian felt a profound shift inside him. "You do belong here," he said softly. Clara adores you, and so do—" He hesitated, the words catching in his throat, but Amara looked up, her eyes wide. "So do I," he finished, his voice barely a whisper. The divorce was swift. Isabel, confronted with evidence of her theft and abandonment, relinquished her parental rights in exchange for Julian not pressing criminal charges. Julian legally adopted Clara as a single father, and then he did something that stunned everyone, most of all himself. He asked Amara to marry him. "Not because I need a mother for Clara," he said, getting down on one knee in the very nursery where he had first seen her on the floor. "But because I love you, because you saved my daughter, and in doing so, you saved me." Amara looked at this powerful billionaire kneeling before her, offering her a ring that cost more than she had earned in a lifetime. "I love you too," she whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. "But are you sure? You are not just anything," Julian said firmly, his eyes shining. "You are the woman who loved my child when no one else would. You are the woman who showed me what real strength and kindness look like. You are the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with." 3 months later, they were married in the garden, where Amara had taught Clara to love flowers. Clara, now walking and calling Amara Mama, was their flower girl. But their story was only just beginning. Amara had dreams that extended beyond her own family. She wanted to help other women like her, women who worked in the shadows, whose love and labor were undervalued. With Julian's full support, she established the Empowerment Initiative, a foundation providing scholarships and career training for single mothers and women from disadvantaged backgrounds. "Everyone deserves to be seen," Amara said in her speech at the foundation's first gala, as Julian and Clara watched proudly from the front row. "Everyone deserves to be valued for the love in their heart, not the station they were born into." Years later, when Clara was 5, she would ask her mama Amara about the night they first slept on the nursery floor together. "You were scared and alone," Amara would tell her, stroking her daughter's hair. "And I couldn't bear the thought of you being afraid by yourself." Sometimes, love means meeting someone right where they are, even if it's on a hard, cold floor. "And Daddy found us there?" "Yes, baby girl, and that's when everything changed." "Because he saw that you loved me?" Amara smiled, remembering the night a billionaire finally learned that the most valuable assets in life, love, kindness, and family, could never be bought or sold. "Yes, Clara, because he finally saw what was right in front of him all along." And in the beautiful nursery, now filled with family photos and Clara's colorful artwork, where a comfortable armchair had long since replaced the patch of hard floor, the family forged in the most unexpected of circumstances continued to build a love that was stronger than any fortune. If you enjoy this story, please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.